All right, let's do part two. Part one, we talked about how even the best and most idealistic institutions in America, like universities, are effectively avoiding taxes by design, just like everyone else. And so when you have people avoiding taxes from top to bottom, good guys, bad guys, everyone, the mob, the college professor, the employer of the college professor, you've got a problem, because if people start thinking, my neighbor's not paying taxes, why should I? Now the government's, obviously it runs on taxes and fees as well, parking tickets and so on and so forth. But the problem is, once people realize that they're the only ones paying taxes because they're being honest and not looking for a tax loophole, or not part of a larger organization that can afford to hire lawyers to find tax loopholes, they start not paying their taxes either, and then you've got no one left who's honest. So what we talked about in part one was that you can't have an honest society when you have imbalances, and it's not about debt. But remember, even Epstein started out as a tax consultant. In other words, how to avoid taxes. One of the reasons we don't want to admit this about America, that the entire country is effectively built on a lie, is number one, if everyone's cheating, the government doesn't get paid. That's number one. And then it can't compete. Now, I happen to lean libertarian, but that's because I'm looking for another option to the government. I don't mind if the government is less expensive and more inefficient, as long as that option exists. And so you want to have two options. And that actually, despite everything I've talked about, is the reason why the United States has worked so well. When the government has failed, private corporations and multinational corporations and small businesses have stepped in. Conversely, when the corporations have failed, the government has stepped in, and now you've got this balance. You don't have that in many other systems. Particularly, let's say, actually one of the reasons China has become so successful is because it's kind of caught on to this sort of duality within the capitalistic structure, and it's used it to its own advantage. Now, so we talked about how this is an issue, not having an honest society. But let's get philosophical. Why can't we tell the truth? Why can't an honest man in America, or an honest woman, succeed simply by being honest, more so than the person who is looking for loopholes? And the fundamental problem with this is that if everything around you is built on a lie, or dishonesty, or tax evasion, you're a part of it. And so we don't want to look at it, because I just came from a gym on a campus that is a part of a nonprofit, but effectively a religious institution that, because it's a nonprofit university, evades taxes. So I'm part of the problem as well, sort of. So the problem is that once we look at society this way, the honest people have an incentive to be dishonest, right? You don't have that, not necessarily propaganda, but you don't have that image to maintain, and that's important. Whether it's children or adults, you want an image to maintain. But the other issue is that everyone's touched by it, just like something else that this country is built on. Remember? How did that institution, which is Catholic, get so affluent, get so rich? Well, did it have anything to do with shipping tobacco, cotton, and sugar across the Atlantic Ocean? Any of that? Just like then, you couldn't be around that kind of a society without being touched by immorality. The degree of immorality has changed. It's become less, thank goodness. But it's still there. So number one, philosophically, this is very difficult for us to understand, because there's really no upside, to believing the country you live in is effectively built on dishonesty and evading an honest living effectively. And even Warren Buffett has talked about, he's considered the greatest or most honest businessman in America. He's talked about, if you can cut out the government as a de facto shareholder in your company, you've just saved 40% on taxes. Somehow you're, right? You've taken that out. And so even he has, this is supposed to be the honest, the Midwestern, sort of most honest businessman in America. Even he's got a statement that says, let's avoid taxes. And all these people that say, I only have a $1 salary, or whatever, that's because they're avoiding taxes. They're not being nice. They're avoiding taxes. They're getting their money into a different vehicle, like long-term capital gains, that pays less taxes. And then before they even cash it out, they put it into a charitable foundation. Oh, what's a charitable foundation? Nonprofit, doesn't pay taxes. So I wanted to discuss all this because fundamentally, what Trump has done is amplify everything. Now, if you're an American, you can't deny that your society is built on a lie. This is a problem because, number one, your society shouldn't be based on a lie. And if we simply admit to ourselves that the United States was built on an immoral foundation, but luckily we've been getting better year after year. That's not necessarily a bad place to start, but no one wants to do it. So the political structure in this country, until Trump, was built to prevent us from figuring out the society we live in. Now we can't do it. Epstein was connected with Trump. And everyone else, almost everyone else is a billionaire. And this is not a political left or right. Noam Chomsky, Woody Allen. You've got left and right all going to the island to sort of get touched by a tax consultant and his or her advice, Bill Gates, technology, and so on. And what was that island? Probably another way of avoiding taxes. So what do you do? And I think this is where we get kind of caught, because let's say your society is built on a lie. Trump is not new. He's simply amplifying what most people should already know but don't, because their schools aren't telling them what's really going on. Because they themselves are touched by that system. They're part of that system, just like every person 200 years ago was part of the slavery system, whether directly or indirectly, even if they did not own slaves or the institution. So once you're in that society, it becomes very difficult to be honest. So the first question is, what do you do within this kind of a society that is effectively built on multiple prongs of dishonesty? And I think all you can do, what I've tried to do, I'm not necessarily the best example, try to carve out my own little, space where I can be honest. If I tried doing law, couldn't be honest, so I went and did something else. That's Abraham Lincoln's advice, by the way. But guess what? Abraham Lincoln was a racist as well. Now, I don't know whether he said what he said during the debates to mollify the voting masses, but there's evidence. If you go down to the museum in Mississippi, in Jackson, you'll see that he was just as bad as everyone else. So like I said, look at the full Star-Spangled Banner, the full version, you'll see. Now, what I've tried to do is find people who've tried to carve out their own space as well. So James Baldwin, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, these are the people. Now you can say these are Americans too, right? They were in a dishonest society, but they were still Americans. And they did the best they could. And that might be a lesson for all of us, right? And it's not necessarily going to be the easiest lesson. James Baldwin, of course, left to France. Muhammad Ali suffered Parkinson's, and Malcolm X was shot. The problem is, that as an individual, you're not going to be able to fix the society that you're in unless the example that you set is an honest one. And that's one place to start, because everyone around you is part of the matrix, effectively. So if you go up to them and say, everything around you is a lie, and then built on this foundation of immoral slavery that nobody wants to acknowledge, nobody wants to talk about, 42 acres and a mule except for Spike Lee's production company, and nobody wants to talk about things that are, at this point, so far removed from their daily lives that it feels as if it's not touching them, it's not nearby, and it's not a part of their society. And yet, I'm here in an outdoor strip mall. These stores have been effectively the same, almost all of them, since 20 years ago when I was going to the law school behind me that I just came out of. But a tailoring shop, a dry cleaning shop, none of these signs have changed. Only UPS, which is based on logistics, a global company effectively, has changed from what I can tell. Hairdresser, and a marijuana shop, drugs, yay. So the consequence of all of this, right, is that other countries, money is mobile, capital moves. It's people that are stuck. So the idea would be that you would want to look at the travel, look at other societies that are trying to do better. And who knows, maybe you meet somebody there, maybe you feel more at home over there, maybe there are more honest people over there. But you've got to remember, a society that is too honest is probably not going to be that much fun. So it's always about that balance and trying to find it.